You're all set, so I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Cynthia. So welcome everybody. We're glad you're here.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our monthly business roundtable focusing on a local business owned by a person of color in Howard County. Tonight, our guest is Patricia Newby, MBA, president and founder of Strategic Business Partnerships. Patricia will share the experiences and the challenges she faces as a local business owner. Discussion tonight is moderated by Nat Alston, chair and founder of the Ujamaa Business Roundtable. We're now going to turn this over to Nat to introduce Patricia and get us started. Thank you, Nat.
Well, thank you, Cynthia, and welcome everyone. We want to welcome our visitors here for our monthly business showcase meeting, and I'm so happy to have the partnership with the Howard County Library. So I've got to get that shout out this afternoon or this evening to Nancy and Cynthia, and again to the Howard County Library staff. So one of the best library systems in the country. And again, thank you so much. As Cynthia mentioned, our guest for tonight is a good friend of mine who's got a business here, and we're going to really let her do all the talking. I'll just ask some strategic questions in here. Is Patricia Newby. And Patricia, welcome to our business showcase.
Well, Nat, thank you, and I appreciate you having me. My thanks also to Nancy and her team and the Howard County Library System for providing this platform for business owners so that we can get that visibility to share our journey and hopefully to inspire others to consider starting businesses as well.
Well, you hit on a key word, Patricia, and if you don't mind, I always call you Pat. So if you don't mind me calling you Pat, okay.
That's fine.
Well, Pat, you hit on a very key note to launch us and get us started. Helping people or inspiring people on their journey. So really tell us your journey. You've been in business for, you fill in that blank, but really beginning, what made you pursue this journey to where you are now?
So thank you, Nat. So I've been in business for 9 years. I started this venture as my post-retirement activity. And so it really goes back to, just throughout life, as we hire different contractors to do work for us, some of them, it might have been someone building a deck for you or redoing your basement. And what I found was that they were so talented. I mean, when it came to their craft and their discipline, they knew what they were doing. They were second to none. However, what I realized over time was that the business side of their business was really a challenge for them. And so in cases where I might have used a contractor and then gone back a couple years later to engage their services again to find out that they were no longer around. And so, as I look at my journey in corporate America, I had the opportunity to just be exposed to just so much in terms of training, experience. And I thought it would be great in retirement to pass that on, to pay it forward to other business owners. What I say all the time, at least in my family, in my neighborhood, we did not sit around the kitchen table discussing how to start and run a business. And so there's a lot that a lot of small business owners don't know. It's not that they don't want the knowledge, it's just that they don't have access and opportunity. And so I thought that this would be a perfect opportunity in retirement to if I look back at my career, it took on a unbelievable trajectory, I think just by chance. So just to make this story hopefully not too long, I was attending Morgan State University as a math major. I was always looking for a job to help pay for, going back and forth to school, to pay for lunch. We didn't necessarily have, a lot of funds. And so one Christmas break, I looked in the paper and I saw an ad for a position at Union Trust Bank, if any of you remember Union Trust, at a branch in downtown Baltimore.
Yeah,
and
you're
it was
dating
the
yourself
perfect
now, you know that, don't
Yeah,
you?
I know. Some things we just have to accept in life, right?
Right.
And so the idea was that you would be trained for 2 weeks and then they would give you a job. So my plan was to apply for the job, go through the training, work for a couple of weeks, and then quit and go back to school. And then I would have enough money to make it through the semester. So as things would happen, it was time to go back to school. And guess who did not have the nerve to walk into that office and say, I'm leaving. So I thought, okay, well, just work through this semester and then, to be a longer period of time, and it won't look so bad when you say you have to go back to school. Well, as chance would have it, I received a letter in the mail from Westinghouse Electric Corporation, and they were inviting me to a presentation on a work study program. And the concept was that I would finish my degree at night, I would attend Johns Hopkins University and pursue an engineering degree, because the entire purpose was to increase the number of minorities in engineering. I went to the presentation. My mother said, of course you're going to the presentation. That's not even a discussion. So we went to the presentation, and because I had 1.5 years of college completed, because as you remember, I did not return to college that semester, you needed 2 years completed to join the program. So they said, Pat, we'll come back next year if you're interested. And they did. I went into the program. I later transferred to Loyola. I was a computer science major. Long story short, I retired in 2011 as the vice president of one of their business areas. So for me, that was access and opportunities that I could not even dream of. And so I feel that it's incumbent upon me, having received that experience, having been afforded the opportunity to attend the top business schools in the country at the expense of the company, that I wanted to pay that forward and help small business owners.
When you say that, and we always think about those times when you're in corporate America, you took advantage of one of the opportunities that they will have out there for you where you can go back to school and they will pay either a percentage of it based on your grades and all. I know when I was in HR for corporations, that's what we did to encourage our employees to go back to school. And in some cases to get a degree that was related to the company, or in other cases that just that degree in general. So that really catapulted you. Now you left now and you use that term retire. And, that's a bad term around here for some of us to use, that R word. I always say you didn't retire, you transitioned.
Exactly.
So yeah, we've got to get that term in there, because many of us boomers out here, and I'm getting laughter from some, that R word, I just don't want to have any association with. So just a little dig right there. What made you decide to transition then, since you were leaving one, and what made you decide to, as I said, transition into what you're doing now, and why?
I always wanted to start a consulting business. And so for one, so I'm a strong believer in strength leadership. So there's an assessment that you take. It tells you what your top leadership talents are. And so one of mine is achiever. So I need to achieve something each and every day. And I was so glad when I did that assessment, because I was the type of person, as I was advancing through my career, I would get a promotion and I would be so excited for like 30 days. And then I would be like, so what's next? Okay, we've gotten used to this. What else am I going to do? So when I did the assessment, I'm an achiever, so I always need to be productive. And so I knew as I transitioned out of corporate America that I needed a place to leverage my skills and to help others. And so I thought as a consultant, that would be a great way to do so. And also the challenge of it is like, can I do this? Can I get out there, set this goal, and actually, run a business? I was just looking forward to the experience and as a way to help others as well.
Yeah, because I would think when you're going out there on your own, it's a little scary, I would imagine. Was it for you?
Well, so I don't know that it was scary, but having that corporate background, as you also had, I knew everything that needed to be done. I knew how it had to be done, but it's a different thing when you're the one who has to do it all. And so I knew what needed to be in place, but I was used to that machine, that you had access to that would make all those things happen for you. So it was really about how am I going to make these things happen? Where do I go to get the knowledge and the guidance and the direction, and just kind of move forward and just see where it takes me.
I'm going to ask you a typical question. When most of us go into business, we either use our name and all. What made you decide, or how did you come up with the name?
So I took that path as well. So, was it going to be Newby and Associates, what? And so this is the interesting thing. I knew I wanted to be a consultant. I was afforded the opportunity to work on a lot of different areas in the corporation. So I knew I wanted to consult, but I had no idea what I was going to consult about. So I said, you need a name that no matter what you decide to do, it's going to work. And and so I thought about, okay, so strategy sounds good. You kind of want to partner with small business owners to help them grow their business. And so that's kind of how I came up with the name.
Well, that's good, because people sometimes will struggle on the name, and then the first thing that they'll fall back on, as they say in the computer world, we'll default back to our own name and either have Newby and Associates or something like that. So I always was curious. So,
and I also thought about the letters. So, because people have a tendency, we cut everything short, everything becomes like an acronym. And so I was kind of playing around with the letters to kind of see what they would look like, because sometimes you don't think about it ahead of time and you put something together and people say, do you know what that really looks like on? And so I had to be careful. So SBP, some people, they, shorten it instead of saying strategic business partnerships, they use the letters. And so, just want to make sure to be in the S or in the right place in the P, and, because sometimes you can get things mixed up and it can be a little touchy. So I took that into consideration as well.
Yeah, we want to keep it PG-13 as much as we possibly can. Right?
Yeah.
I understand on that. Your first year, really, because, we always talk about when we jump out there in that pool, that first year, and they always say, if you can make it the first year or the first 5, whatever, share with us really that first year, because you had to go out there and generate business. So what was that first year like?
It was interesting, so I spent some time taking some courses, the SBA has a lot of online courses. I took a couple of those, I talked to people, I had friends who were in business, and so talked to them, making connections, but it was all about, I need that first contract. And so what am I going to do? And fortunately, I had a very dear colleague and friend who connected me with some people, and also was my first client. And so I actually launched the business or registered the business in April and had my first contract in December. And so that was just really, really exciting. And so you're out there, you're trying to figure out, how am I going to connect with people? And being a consultant and working with small business owners, I thought about, I want to connect with people who also work with small business owners, and who might they be? So one of the connections that my colleague made was a vice president at a credit union. And she afforded me the opportunity. So first I'm talking to her and we're discussing the business. And so she says, so do you write business plans? And I said, oh, business plans? Well, I'm sure I can, but it's really not what I had in mind. And so she went on to share with me her experience of, businesses coming in, needing a business plan because they're looking for funding. And what she was seeing just wasn't cutting it. It just was not what was needed. And I said, well, that's a great idea. I'll think about that. And so that's what I started doing. I started advertising that I would coach people through the business planning process. Because when I first started, it was a coaching business, because I did not want the liability of a consulting business. And so I said, I will coach people through the process. So one of the platforms that she provided for me was to actually conduct seminars at the credit union. She had an entire series for business owners. So one was on business planning. They had it on financials, on legal, on marketing. And so I'm conducting this seminar, and it was very well attended. I think there were 30 some people. I was just beside myself. And so someone, raised their hand and they asked a question, and they said, do you write business plans for people? And I said, well, I coach you through the process because this is your business. It has to be your plan. And so they were like, okay, thank you. And so then I thought about it. And as I met people, what I realized is that they were not interested in writing the plan. They wanted someone to help them through the process, but writing was not their thing. So this is one of those cases where I started listening to my market. And so
Okay.
then I also did a kind of a little pivot and added, I will write it for you. We will go through the business planning process. We will use your thoughts, your ideas. I will capture it in the business plan because that's what the business plan is. It is capturing that process. And so it is amazing to me how many people are on board. You know, they want the process, they do not want to create the document.
Right, right. Well, listening to you, it gives me the impression that you started out one way, having something in your mind, but then when you started to connect with other people, you use a key word. I had to pivot and then take on a whole different line of business or a group of businesses out there that I really didn't anticipate launching when I started out in my first venture there in April. This is not something that I planned. So how did you get that flexibility? How were you able to make that pivot?
Well, yeah, it was interesting. What I found was that the business plan and generation and process was really just a way to get my foot into the door. So once I actually provided that service to a business, they were like, well, Pat, do you also do XYZ? How about, could you help me with this? Could you help me with that? Can you help me with my new managers? Can you help me, look at the business and see what we should be doing to solve this problem? And so it's interesting because those are the types of things that I wanted to do from the beginning. But it's like, what's that entree? What is it that you say that connects you to people, that they feel that, yes, this is the person I want to move forward. So the business planning process really is the way for people to get to know who I am, for me to understand what they're trying to accomplish in their business. And then we see how we can move forward in a manner that has me providing additional assistance to them in, helping them to grow their business and, build that firm foundation and moving forward.
You've mentioned the 7 years now. What, during that time, were there any major challenges that occurred that you really had to just stop, take a breath, or just in general, were there major challenges? And if they were, what did you have to do to really get around them or face them? What did you do? Yeah.
So the challenge, and I think it's a challenge that a lot of business owners face. I have a couple of groups of business owners that I interact with. One is, of course, the Ujamaa Business Roundtable. And that, as you know, we've been meeting for, would you believe, since December of 2018. I went back to my calendar today. So we've been meeting, as a group of consultants and working together. I also have a group of women business owners. The marketing, how do you keep the pipeline full? Because depending on the size of your business, your head is down, you're in the business, you're delivering the products and services. And if you're not careful, you'll look up one day and it's like, wow, I finished all those contracts. What do I do now? And so what you need to do at the same time is to get out and to connect and to build relationships and to understand where your next opportunity is coming from. And so what I would say, I've been very, very blessed because I'm sitting here thinking, oh, wow, I'll be wrapping up these couple of contracts soon. What's next? And the phone will ring, or I'll receive an email, and there's the next opportunity. So one of the things I decided to do in 2019 was to be much more intentional about building that pipeline and understanding how I wanted to grow the business. And so, as I said before, I think I just want to help people with their businesses, whatever that looks like, because I did have a lot of experience. One of my experiences in corporate America, I moved to Ohio. We had a subsidiary that was struggling. It was losing money. Things just weren't going well. So I was there with a team. We turned the business around. We doubled revenue, and we took it from double-digit losses to double-digit profits. And so that was a great experience for me. It was the hardest assignment I've ever had, but I learned a lot from it. And so when I decided to start this business, I wanted to use all of those things that I did in that environment to help business owners. And so it's about, it helped me to, when I decided with the business planning, and as I said, when I started working with people, they said, Pat, can you help me with training? Can you help me with my finances? It helped me to step back and say, you really need to focus on what you're going to do with your business. So one of the difficult things for me, now that I'm thinking about it, one of my main goals was to help small business owners in underrepresented communities.
Mm.
And I get a lot of joy out of that. It's a noble cause. It doesn't always keep the doors open.
Okay.
And so it was, how do I feed my passion of helping these businesses and at the same time have a viable, sustainable business? As I said, I'm an achiever. I set goals for what revenue looks like. I come from corporate America. Numbers tell you how well you're doing. And so, I brought that kind of discipline into running my business. And so I really had to figure out a way, how am I going to help them and still have a business that grows and is actually meeting the financial targets that I've set for myself? And so I found a couple of ways to do that. One, pro bono works. At the beginning of each year, I decide how many pro bono projects I take on.
Interesting.
I also then, it's kind of like a Robin Hood mentality. So,
Okay.
the rich to help support the less rich. So I have clients, high-paying corporate clients, and I use that to kind of compensate for the small business owners who are not always in a position to invest a significant amount of money. So part of my goal is to provide access and opportunity to everyone. And so people start from different places. So I had to think about my pricing scale. So I have a sliding scale. And
That's
so if
good.
it's a startup, I have a certain rate. If it's someone who's established and they're working for a while, I have another rate. And if it's a corporate client, I have a rate. So it's really one, and I've really just, after being in business 9 years, I've actually just come to a comfortable spot where I think I have the formula for that.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Because that was one of the points, and I'll get to a question that was asked in the chat, was always, when we're in business for ourselves, how do we make that pricing in there? And I'll just share, if you don't mind, a little bit with me in terms of my pricing model too. I, coming out of the hospitality industry, and as you know, and for some of our guests, I always joke, I work for a nice little mom and pop company called Marriott Corporation. And I used to call it mom and pop because when I was there, J.W. Marriott and his wife were at the top of the leadership. So I said, well, I guess I'm working for one of the largest mom and pop organizations in the world. But what they would basically do was had a term called market segmentation. And if I was doing something, let's say a training or whatever in DC, my DC rate was a lot higher than my Baltimore rate. My Baltimore rate was probably a lot less than if I was doing work out in San Francisco, because it's the same way. And you go into a hotel, if you get a hotel in New York, it's a lot more expensive than it is in Baltimore. And I learned that working in the hotel division. So guess what? When I did the same training in DC for a client in DC, I priced it on the DC market. And when I did the same training in Baltimore, I knew I couldn't charge a DC price, so I charged a Baltimore price. So it was basically that marketing segmentation in there that I'll just share to our audience too, that one of the things that you and I talked about a lot at Pat is, how do you price the services that you want to provide to these corporations? You said pro bono and others. That's a good segue, because one of our chat questions in here was, what was the business like doing, or I should say not was, but how is the business surviving and thriving during this pandemic?
I as I talk about the pandemic with others, I comment that it's a tragedy, the loss, just what the country and the world has gone through. I think if we look at some of the upside, it has forced us all to slow down. It has forced us to look at life differently. And as a result of looking at life differently, people are making different lifestyle choices. And I think one of those choices is to not continue to do what they were doing. I think more people are moving into starting businesses. And so actually business is grown, has thrived during the pandemic. I would have loved to have it thrive without all the loss of life, without all the angst and everything else that we're going through. But I think people are saying there has to be a better way. You know, when you're a part of something, when you do it day in and day out, when you don't have time to think about what's going on, you're just putting one foot in front of the other. You really don't have time to step back and think, what do I really want for my life? What are my options? What are the possibilities? I think the fact that things have slowed down has actually given a lot of people the chance to kind of have those discussions as families, to kind of explore that for themselves. I think it might be a stat that you shared with us, Nat, that Black female-run businesses are growing faster than any other
that is true.
Group of businesses out there. The other trend that I've noticed, when I first started, we were going through this whole kind of tech thing, and people were saying, you don't need a business plan, just get out there and do it and see what you find, and then tweak it based on what you find. What I'm seeing now, there's a lot more emphasis on business planning and actually thinking about what you're doing and stepping out with purpose. So, sometimes you have to be around long enough for the tide to change in your direction. I tell people, you need to stay in business long enough. Your opportunity is right around the corner. You just need to still be in existence when it shows up.
And I think too, Pat, if I may add, and you can chime in too, is that when we're operating in our business, we got to spend that time operating away from our business or on top of that business. I've always used the analogy sometimes that we've got to stay at that 30,000 feet up at times because the winds are blowing. And back to your point, during this pandemic, and I've shared it with other business owners too, we've got to look at where that wind is blowing and how can we make that pivot. So what words that when you were going through this pandemic, and now it's been 15, 16 months, we shut down basically in March, and now here it's around the corner, we're in June. When you look back at this period of time, what did you learn about your business, your client's business, and then what did you learn really about yourself in terms of reflection as you're in your business that you can pass on to our audience here?
So the lessons learned through the pandemic, I really understood what parts of the business I enjoyed. I recognize, there's a lot of focus on economic development. And, as we look at these different programs who provide funding to businesses, so I'm a TEDCO advisor, and TEDCO is the technical arm for entrepreneurs in Maryland. What they always look for is how many jobs are you creating? So it's not enough that you have a business, you are generating revenue, you're taking care of yourself, but they want to invest in businesses who are also investing in other people and providing opportunities for others. So I realized that, I started thinking about how can I grow the business in such a way that I'm providing opportunities for others, providing employment, that sort of thing. I noticed that in terms of my clients, I guess people are really, more people are willing to invest in their business than I initially thought. I think it's a matter of when is the right time for them. So, when you first start your business and you meet someone and it's a potential business opportunity, you're so focused on closing that deal. And so you're more focused on what you want than on what they want and what they need. And so what I found over time, and so I had to get out of that mode of, you have to close that deal before you leave this room. It was let people know what you do, understand what their needs are, how you can help them. And if they need your services, if they want to work with you, when it is right for them, they will find you. And so what I found, and people are calling me 2 years later, saying, Pat, I kept your number, I'm ready to go. And believe me, they are serious and they are ready to go. So it's really about looking at everything from your client's perspective what are their needs? How can you help them? When is the best time for them? And so I do a lot of customizing when it comes to how I offer my packages and my programs, because what I don't want is to create a burden for someone that I'm supposed to be helping. So if you're going into financial distress to procure my services, that's not the right partnership. And so it's not all about you signing up with me and working with me. It is about what works for you in terms of what you need to grow your business and what fits in your budget. And if we could spread it out over multiple years, that's fine. But really focusing on what they need. But what I'm seeing, it seems like more people are really ready and wanting to take those steps that will help them to be the best that they can be and that their businesses can grow and thrive.
Great, great. Got another question in our chat, and thank you, Brenda, for putting that in there. Do you have a tool for those entering the idea of starting a business, ways to evaluate one's readiness?
So one tool that I've found, I call it the one-page business plan. It's called the Lean Canvas. So for my purpose, I'm a one-page person. So when I had a member of my team coming to me, you can go through 20 pages, bring me one piece of paper, and we can talk on that one piece. And so it is a nice tool that has you look at the problem you're solving, what are the current solutions in existence for that problem, what is your solution, why is your solution better than the other solutions out there, who are you going to test this whole idea on, what's the market that you're going to kind of go out and get some feedback, what are your revenue streams, so how is this idea going to generate revenue for you, how are you going to determine whether it's successful now, what metrics are you going to use to kind of evaluate it, and what's your secret sauce, what is it that people cannot copy, take, what is it that you have that no one else has? And those are like your differentiators. So it's all about what's your value proposition, what problem are you solving, who are you solving it for, and how are you creating value for people?
Great, great. Got another question in here. Thank you, Tracy, for putting that in here too. Pat, what do you do to motivate yourself just on a day-to-day basis?
Create a sense of urgency.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, what do you mean by a sense of urgency now? I'm going to follow.
So as I said, I was afforded the opportunity to attend some top business schools when I worked at Northrop Grumman. One of them was Harvard Business School. It was a general manager's program, 7.5 weeks. You went on campus, you stayed in the dorm room. So you went on campus for 3.5 weeks, went back into the workplace and applied what you learned, and then you went back again. So you're reading a lot of cases. It was an excellent, overwhelming at times, but it was an excellent program. And so one of the things they mentioned was creating a sense of urgency, and it was more in getting other people inspired. And so what you do is that you set these like deadlines for yourself. You set these targets. You have to do X by Y. And so now I'm a deadline person. You tell me something has to be done by a certain day, I really get excited. And so that's what I mean by setting, creating a sense of urgency. What has to be done? When does it have to be completed by? What is it going to help you do? You just kind of come up with these things to help move yourself forward. As I said, I'm an achiever. So I'm just setting goals, and it's all about, once I set a goal, it's all about achieving that goal.
Mm-hmm. And I guess as a follow-up too, can you discuss any matrix that you maintain or anything like that?
A matrix in terms of
metrics rather, I'm sorry, metrics.
Oh, metrics. Oh, yes. Okay. So, we all have the metrics of how much money we want to make by a certain time. Another metric I have is how many new clients I want in a year. Mm-hmm. Repeat clients. So if you have a business and your business, you want it to grow, it really grows if you can retain the clients you have and add onto it. If you're constantly replacing, you're not really growing. You're just kind of maintaining. So I look at repeat work. I look at the number of clients. I look at, of course, the numbers And sometimes even am I branching off into a new, doing something different. So as a consultant, people say, okay, so what industry do you work with? And I say, I work with all of them because, well, first of all, when I first started, because you don't want to turn any work down, you don't really care what industry a person is in. They want your help, you're going to help them. And so I keep saying, maybe over time I'll identify a niche. And so it's not so much a niche in terms of the clients, it's a niche in how I describe what I do. So I tell people that I do three things. I guide startups through the business planning process to launch their businesses and to acquire funding. I facilitate strategic planning for established businesses to help them to grow their businesses and or to pivot and to acquire the funding to do so. And I work with business owners and corporate leaders to develop their unique leadership style. And so one metric that I did set for myself was to grow training, the leadership training side of the business, or more training. That was in 2019. And so it was interesting. The very thing that I do with my clients, I hired I had a partnership with a storyteller to help me to crisp my story. So when you go out, you're meeting people and they ask you what your business is. 5 minutes later, their eyes are glazed over, my eyes are glazed over, and I'm the one talking. So that's a problem. And I was like, you have to find a better way to tell this story. So I met this guy. He did a presentation at a TEDCO meeting, advisors meeting, and I engaged with him. And so I started working on crisping up the message. One of the things that he did when I was working with him, he said, let's look at your portfolio of contracts. And so he did what I do with other people. Which ones, how are you doing in each one? Which ones are your real money makers? And so when I started this business, I never started it to be a trainer. And that's where all the money was. And so I was kind of thinking, wow, well, you need to grow this if this is actually, a substantial part of the revenue that you're generating. The other reason why that was attractive to me was in corporate America, I was really big into leadership and culture. And so what I found was that people weren't as excited and happy about coming to work as I thought they should be. I realized that people come into the workplace excited and that something happens along the way where they lose their fire. That corporations, especially large corporations, were investing a lot of money in employee engagement, but they weren't recognizing that the simple things they do on a daily basis were causing employees to be disengaged. And so one of the things that I thought would be great, because all of these large corporations started as a small company at some point in time. So my thing was, as I'm working with small business owners, I wanted them to focus on a couple of things: their why, their purpose, the impact they wanted to have, and the legacy they wanted to leave. And I wanted them to be able to create a team that was committed and not compliant. And so that's about getting people on the same page, understanding what you're trying to accomplish. They believe in it, they understand your values. And so, I say, we don't need this huge employee handbook because there is never going to be a handbook that's large enough to cover every single incident that you may encounter in an organization. So what you want to do, and the way I see it, is that you create this framework within which you want people to work, this loose framework that embodies your core values, the goals for the company, your purpose, your why, and you provide them with a platform where when something happens, they have the tools to make the decision that this is what Pat would want me to do in this situation. This is what Nat would want me to do. So it's not just going and just following the book. I mean, how many times have we walked into a store or an establishment and we ask for something and it's like, oh, I can't do that. Well, because the handbook says I can't do it. So we need to, I want to empower people, make them look forward to coming to work. So I say that people need three things. They want to be heard, they want to be appreciated, and they want to feel that what they do makes a difference. And so, when I looked at this whole avenue of going to training, it really fitted with my passion around leadership and culture. And so when I look at the business from a large scale, I kind of came up with this idea at the beginning. I want to bring business savvy to small businesses, and I want to take the entrepreneurial spirit into corporate America.
Very good points in there. And I was taking mental notes too. And it goes back to one of the questions in here. Were you able to assist small businesses in sustaining their business? When you talk about purpose, why, the leadership, all of those things in there, were you able to, during this pandemic with some of the small businesses that you operated, were you able to help them develop that culture, develop that sustainability, develop, or at least instill in them a purpose or passion and define their why?
Yeah, it's amazing, the thing that keeps the business going. So, running a business is challenging, it's rewarding, but it also has its challenges. If you're in business to only make money, it's not going to be enough to sustain you. It's just not enough. Because on those late nights when you need to make a decision, when you need to grind it out and make things happen, you need more. You need something that's going to keep you going. You need something that's going to keep your team going. And so, yeah, so it's
I always said too,
yeah,
I probably echo and let you elaborate on it too, that when we were in corporate, people say, well, I need a pay raise, I need more money. That's a stimulator. It's never going to be a motivator for you to continue on. And when you go into business, you said, why are you in business? What's your purpose in business? And then one of the key things I'd like for you to elaborate on too, that I'm finding too, and I want to find out if you see it too, the legacy. We go into business, but what are you finding out when you ask that question to your business clients? Do they really understand what you mean by legacy?
Yeah, exactly. So, one of the questions I ask is, what's your exit strategy? And it's kind of like, why are we talking about exit strategy? I'm just trying to get the business started. I said, because that will determine what you do in your business. It will determine how you set it up. It will determine the goals and objectives that you set for yourself. So if your exit strategy is to sell this business to someone, if it's to pass it on to a family member, you're going to need some things in place. There are things that you should have in place for yourself, but you will definitely need them in place if you're going to pass it on to others, in terms of processes and procedures and, what are your core values? What is your commitment to the community? One of the things I think as small businesses, we need to recognize that we need to give back. You don't have to be a Walmart or a Warren Buffett to make charitable contributions. As small businesses, we should be doing that as a part of who we are and what we do. And so it's really about, because I say, if you know where you're going, you see things differently along the way. So if I decide that when I decided I wanted to grow the training side of my business, when I'm sitting down and talking with someone and they mention a need in their company, if that is on my radar, now it's time for me to chime in and say, really? So what are you looking for? So you use it as a learning experience to say, what types of things are people looking for when it comes to corporate training? And so you see opportunities that you otherwise would have missed if you have a mission and purpose, if you have guidance and direction and you know what you're trying to accomplish. A lot of things become a lot more obvious. There's a saying, and I actually meant to look it up. What is the name of the book? But the key premise is, when you put it out there in the universe, the whole world conspires to make it happen. And so what I found is that when we are vulnerable enough to share with people what we're trying to do, or when we make ourselves vulnerable enough to share with people where we need help and where we are finding challenges, one of the things I found in starting my business, it was amazing to me how much people want to help you and expect nothing in return. It was overwhelming. It was truly unbelievable.
Well, Pat, I'm just going to piggyback on that. When you do that, weren't you thinking you were going to leave yourself maybe open and vulnerable for any opportunities people take advantage of you, or what?
So, I think as in corporate America, you have to have that moral compass. You have
Mhm.
to, understand what's important to you, what you're willing to do and not do. And so, yeah, people will, in your kindness, there are people who will take advantage. And so you learn some hard lessons. At the same time, you don't want to punish everyone because of a couple of people who may not act in an ethical
Mhm.
manner. Um, so yeah, I mean, there are people who will take advantage of your kindness, and I had to get to the point where if that's what they needed, if that works for them, I won't be doing business with them again, or I won't be there for them again. But so you really want to work to make sure it doesn't taint you, because there are so many good people out there, and so much good work that's being done. I find that there are so many business owners who are absolute geniuses. I mean, the ideas that they come up with, their patience, their perseverance, just their commitment. For me, it's exciting. So I want to help them because what they're doing is so great. How could I not want to help them? At the same time, I have run across people who have asked me to work with them and do things, and I had to tell them, I'm not the right person for you at this time. And so the message is, they didn't do business the way I thought business should be done. And so there's not enough money out there for me to want to do things that don't align with who I am and what I believe in. And so you have to make some real choices as you're out there. The other thing I don't do, I would meet people at different networking events, and we would meet for lunch or whatever, and they would pitch their business and say, well, I will pay you a commission if you recommend me, and they would then go on to talk about their business. I don't do commissions. I don't recommend people based on being paid. I recommend people based on, I know you, I trust you, I know you can get it done, and you're going to represent me well, because that's my reputation on the line. When I refer someone, that is my reputation. And so I don't think that's something that's up for sale.
I agree. Pat, if you had to give some words of wisdom, advice, counsel to our listeners here, our people who are watching, because I'm looking at the list here, and I think I'm the only male in this group, so I'll have a little slight humor. But for our women of color and women in general, you being in business for the length of time, what words of wisdom, counsel, advice would you give for our audience here tonight?
So the first is your why and your purpose. Understand why you're doing what you're doing. And the important part about that is that's how people will connect with you. People connect with stories. People connect with people's journeys. There are a lot of options when it comes to who you acquire your products and services from. So one of the ways that you stand out from others is because people can connect with what you stand for and what you're trying to accomplish. So I think the why and the purpose is extremely important. Relationships are everything. So, I belong to the Greater Baltimore Black Chamber of Commerce, and one of their sayings is, it's not networking, it's relationship building. That's really what you want to focus on. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. I would say be willing to get the help you need, be willing to partner with others. So now that's one of the things in our collaboration, we've found, and that's one of the things that's really, really just taken center stage during COVID, collaborating with other businesses to go after business and to support each other. I mean, that has been key. I would say, especially to women business owners, we have to stop selling ourselves short. We have to stop negotiating against ourselves. So what do I mean by that? So you're talking to someone, they're interested in your services, and they ask you what your fee is. And so I like to talk about in terms of the investment would be. And then it gets quiet. And what do we like to do when it gets quiet? We like to fill the gap. And so if you're talking about fee and it's quiet and you think you need to fill the gap, well, what do you think you're going to start saying? You're going to start negotiating against yourself, and you're going to start lowering your prices, right? No, get comfortable with the quiet. Be comfortable with the silence. We have to stop negotiating against ourselves. An example, so the storyteller that I worked with, and and I don't want this to seem stereotypical, you know, women, we're great business people, but we have the soft side of business. And that's, I think, the reason why some of us do so well. So I'm working with the storyteller, he's a male, and we had the structure set up of how much I would pay and how many hours it would cover a month. And so we would meet, and I would notice that as we're talking, we're going over the time. Now, when I work with my clients, we go over the time, we just go over the time, you know, and because it's important that we accomplish what we're doing. So he had a down payment up front, and then every month he would bill me a certain amount. Well, then I'm starting to get these bills, and he's billing for the extra time. And I'm like,
What they say, the clock is running, the meter's running, huh?
Yeah, so I'm like, no wonder he wasn't in a hurry to stop talking. And so that was a lesson to me. And so I'm not going to be that hard and fast about it. But what it did, it provided insight for me as to how other people approach things. It doesn't mean that I'm going to adapt that methodology, but it did provide me with some insight into how people run their businesses. Yeah.
I can imagine that was definitely a change in your.
That was interesting. So then I started watching the clock when we were meeting.
We've got a few, I'm watching the clock too, so we've got a few minutes left in there.
Okay.
But I want you to spend maybe a minute or so on another key term or concept that you talked about, relationship building. How important is that?
You know, it's key, and I think it's especially important for business owners, because just like advancing through the ranks of corporate America, the higher you go, the lonelier it gets. And so as business owners, especially if it's a single member business, we don't have any, you may not have someone to talk to bounce ideas off of, you know, someone who has like the same mindset. And so I think being there to support each other, and especially in consulting, I need a network. So a lot of clients I work with need other services that I do not provide. And one of the points of value that I want to offer to them is to be able to refer them to someone who's reputable in these, like for an accountant, for legal advice, for marketing, you know, whatever it may be. I want to have established those relationships, know people well enough that I'm comfortable referring people to them, because that's helping my business when I can help my client. So that, and the whole thing about when can you collaborate? So as small businesses, you know, some entities don't see us as being big enough to take on a contract. But if you pool your resources and go in, as you've done in the past, as a joint venture, it opens more doors, you know, for your business. And so relationship building in terms of, you know, building those relationships for the collaboration, to have someone to bounce ideas off of, you know, just to kind of be there for each other. And, you know, just like with the Ujamaa Business Roundtable that you started, you know, 15 years ago, and have so, you know, been so dedicated to making sure that it's a viable, sustainable entity, just to work and learn from other business owners and to support each other. You know, I was reading an article today, and, you know, this guy's a billionaire, and in his story, he's saying, there are so many people I have to thank because they were the ones to help me to be successful. I did not do this by myself.
Great, great. Any closing remarks, Pat, at all?
Well, I'd like to thank Nancy and her team, Cynthia, the Howard County Library System, your fabulous CEO and president, who Tanya Akins, who's an African-American woman, who collaborated with Nat to put this platform in place. You know, and so this is interesting. I invited some of my family members to this showcase because, I mean, what do? You walk in the room, you sit down, you start talking about your business, and looking like, what is she doing? What is she talking about? And so, I just thought it would be a good way to have people kind of understand kind of my thoughts and my motivations behind my business, and a way to share. And so I thank you for the platform. I thank the library system for the opportunity. You know, business owners just need support. And so when you have these types, this ecosystem that allows you to interact and to help each other, it's invaluable. So again, Nat, I thank you with the Ujamaa Business Roundtable, Nancy and Cynthia, your team, to provide this platform for us to share our thoughts, hopefully inspire other people to, when they hear my story or another business owner's story, and they look at their story, they can say, oh, I'm not an anomaly. This seems to be something that happens with all business owners. Because sometimes you think I'm the only person this is happening to, when in fact it may be a common phenomena, but we just don't realize that it is. So just appreciate, I would say, if you're interested in starting a business, get those ideas, get them out of your head, get them on paper, be patient, be persistent, and persevere, and do it your way. So you want to bring your unique, authentic, genuine self to it. Other people may be successful, but they're successful being being them. And so the way for you to be successful is to be yourself. And so a little saying that I use with people is, at the end of the day, the only person you can be is you, because everyone else is taken.
I love that. Very good. Pat, 2 words. Thank you.
But thank you. I appreciate the
No,
opportunity.
thank you for being a part of this. Listening to you continues to inspire me for what we're doing and what I'm doing. So sincerely want to thank you. I want to thank Nancy and Cynthia for being part of this also. And it basically was an idea and a thought, and we brought this together. So again, on the behalf of the Ujamaa Business Roundtable and the Howard County Library System, thank you all in our Zoom audience tonight for being a part of this. Stay tuned for next month. We've got another person that we're going to highlight again on our next month. I think it's June if I look at my calendar real quick, it's June the 29th, I think. Yep, June 29th. Sign in and we've got another person in there. So again, success to all of you that have your own business. If you don't, think about it. Take the plunge. You've got a great person here and Pat Newby that will help you and guide you.
And
to
that
all
also.
Yeah, but hey, we'll talk to Pat. We'll collaborate and help each and every one of you. So again, thank you all for tonight. Again, Pat, thank you. Nancy, thank you. Cynthia, thank you. And to our Zoom audience again, till we meet again next month, June 29th at 7 o'clock. Have a wonderful evening and have a wonderful remaining week, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
We
you.
want to really give a big shout out to Nat and Pat for being in the room with us tonight. It was an honor to be here with you both. So thank you very much. We'll stick around for another minute or two if anybody has any questions, but have a lovely, lovely holiday weekend this weekend. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the recording.
Hey, thank you.